The streets of Savannah, Georgia, were no stranger to scandal in the fall of 1873, but nothing prepared the city for what unfolded that October morning. It began with a body. Walter Linney, a respected banker and land speculator, was found dead in his locked office. The cause: strangulation with a silk cord. There were no signs of forced entry. His desk remained untouched. No valuables were missing. The windows were sealed. The lamp on his desk still burned low. It was a scene so clean, so deliberate, it looked almost staged. The office clerk, who had stepped out just moments earlier, swore he'd seen Linney alive and well, locking the door from the inside. Even stranger, several of Linney's business associates claimed to have seen him walking toward the wharf shortly after 9 a.m., exactly when the coroner estimated he was being murdered. One man dead. But he had just been seen alive by at least 5 people. As panic grew, Savannah's police force, led by the meticulous Inspector Abram Coyle, began interviewing anyone who had seen Linney that morning. And that's when the case took its first impossible turn. A dock worker claimed he helped Linney load a trunk onto a steamer bound for Charleston. A barkeep said he served Linney a brandy an hour after the body was discovered. A priest, shaken and pale, swore Linney had confessed a terrible sin in his chapel at precisely 10 a.m. And finally, a maid at the Linney estate said her employer was resting in his study when the constables came knocking, only to vanish before they could see him. Each sighting was confirmed by multiple witnesses. But Walter Linney was dead, and had been for hours. At first, the city thought it was grief or confusion. Perhaps Linney had a double? A deranged look-alike? But as Inspector Coyle dug deeper, another name began to surface in whispered conversations, unfinished letters, and suspicious gaps in business records. The Kellner brothers. No one knew much about them. Some thought they were German immigrants. Others swore they were born on a plantation just north of the city. But what everyone agreed on was this: there were 4 of them, and they were identical. Not just similar, exactly the same. Same height, same face, same gait. Even their voices were indistinguishable. They dressed differently, carried themselves with slightly different affectations, but if you saw them separately, which was usually the case, you'd never guess there were 4. Over the years, people began to notice strange coincidences. Men who appeared in different professions with the same name. Receipts signed by Kellner in 2 different counties on the same day. A man who worked as a tailor one week and a schoolteacher the next. But no one had ever connected the dots. Until now. Walter Linney, as it turned out, had been investigating banking fraud tied to a series of phantom transactions, all linked to businesses owned by a Kellner. When he dug deeper, he discovered 4 sets of ledgers, each with subtle handwriting differences, and matching amounts transferred between different accounts opened under the same name, but at different branches. Linney had begun to piece together the truth that the Kellners weren't one man running multiple businesses. They were 4, using their identical appearances to commit financial fraud, avoid taxes, and create alibis for each other. And when he got too close, they silenced him. But they didn't just kill Linney. They turned his murder into a message. In the hours after the body was discovered, Savannah was thrown into chaos as 4 separate men, each one identical to the next, were seen impersonating the dead banker, calmly, confidently, and without fear. They weren't just erasing evidence. They were mocking the system. Each sighting of Linney that morning was likely one of the Kellner brothers, showing the city exactly what they were capable of, being seen and not believed, being everywhere and nowhere, being guilty and innocent, all at once. Inspector Coyle issued warrants. Search parties fanned out. But by the time the city mobilized, the Kellners were gone. All that remained was a city in disbelief and a dead man surrounded by locked doors. Savannah, once confident in its law and order, was now haunted by a question it couldn't answer. If 4 men can look like one, how do you ever know who's really standing in front of you? Long before they became Savannah's most elusive criminals, the Kellner brothers were already a local curiosity. Born in 1848 to a midwife named Adelaide Kellner, the boys entered the world on the same stormy night, one after the other, barely minutes apart. It was a delivery that midwives would talk about for years, for living, breathing, identical sons, a miracle or perhaps an omen, depending on whom you asked. They were named in biblical fashion: Caleb, Silas, Edgar, and Luther. From the start, something about them unnerved people. They rarely cried, almost never fought, and seemed to move as one. When one tripped, the others paused. When one stared off into space, the others followed his gaze. Neighbors said they were like shadows of each other, not four boys, but one spirit in four bodies. By the time they were 10, their mother had moved them far from town, raising them in a crumbling farmhouse on the outskirts of Chatham County. She refused schooling, refused visitors. She told anyone who came asking that they don't need the outside world. And somehow she was right. The Kellners taught themselves to read, write, count. They could mimic accents, memorize passages, swap identities mid-conversation without blinking. The rare person who visited the house claimed they couldn't tell who was who, even when they tried. They didn't just look alike. They shared everything: thoughts, gestures, even moods. If one was angry, the others tensed. If one laughed, all laughed. It was as if they weren't siblings, but extensions of the same will. But it wasn't until their late teens that their potential turned into danger. When they entered society, the Kellners began to test boundaries, forging letters, mimicking town officials, tricking clerks into giving them free supplies. But these weren't childish pranks. They were experiments. They wanted to see how far their resemblance could go. Soon, they were swapping jobs. One day, Caleb would serve as a court messenger. The next, Silas would show up in the same role. No one questioned it. Why would they? No one even knew there was more than one. Then came the businesses. They opened small operations: a lumber mill, a transport company, and a medical supply store, all in different names, but with the same address or ledger details. Each brother ran a business for a week at a time, keeping everything just consistent enough to avoid suspicion. They used these companies not to profit, but to learn. They studied paperwork, taxation, shipping routes. They learned how money flowed and where oversight was weakest. And eventually, they began moving money between the businesses: fake loans, fake clients, fake employees, until the entire operation became a maze of illusion. At one point, they even convinced two separate banks to offer loans to the same company, each believing they were dealing with different people. When investigators asked questions, the Kellners simply rotated appearances, making it impossible to confirm who had signed what, or if they were dealing with one man or several. Their greatest power wasn't just deception, it was their ability to weaponize confusion. Walter Linney had been the first to recognize the pattern. A banker with a mind for detail, he noticed the same last name appearing across unrelated business transactions. The same man attending meetings in two cities. Discrepancies in voice, speech, or handwriting. When he tried to confront them, the Kellners panicked, not out of fear of being caught, but out of fear of being understood. Because once someone saw the truth that they were for, their entire advantage collapsed. And so, they did what they always did. They acted as one. The murder of Linney wasn't just a crime. It was a demonstration. It showed how they could be one person, move independently, and yet frame time and space around their plan. They were mirrors of each other, acting with one purpose: to control reality. And as far as Savannah was concerned, they succeeded. By the winter of 1873, Savannah was no longer chasing criminals. It was chasing shadows. After the murder of Walter Linney, and the scattered sightings of what appeared to be the very same man seen alive hours after his death, a wave of panic swept the city. Newspapers printed conflicting headlines. Some claimed Linney had faked his death. Others insisted Savannah had a killer who could vanish at will. No one guessed the truth, that four men had carefully orchestrated a performance so perfectly timed. It turned the entire city into a stage. The Kellner brothers weren't hiding. They were walking openly among the crowd. And the terrifying part? Most people had already seen them without even knowing it. Each brother had his part in the illusion. Caleb, calm and commanding, often took on public-facing roles: shopkeeper, banker, or notary. His voice was persuasive, steady. He gave orders. Silas preferred silence. He mimicked the homeless, the stable boys, the errand runners. He watched people more than he spoke. Edgar was the actor. He impersonated clients, guards, even a clergyman once, reciting sermons with eerie precision. Luther, the most quiet and calculating, worked behind the scenes, forging signatures, editing ledgers, manipulating records. After Lenny's death, the brothers didn't flee. They tightened the net, appearing in different parts of Savannah simultaneously, ensuring witnesses remembered the Kellner face in 4 different places. By the time the city's lawmen realized they were chasing more than one suspect, the damage had been done. Conflicting alibis. Savannah's courthouse filled with statements. A judge claimed Kellner was with him signing land papers at 9:30 a.m. A tavern owner swore Kellner ordered a bottle of Madeira shortly after 10. A dock worker said he helped a Mr. Kellner board a ferry to Charleston just before noon. A teenage boy swore he saw Kellner at Lenny's grave, weeping. Each story was verified. Each came from reliable sources. But how could one man be everywhere? That question became a weapon. Defense attorneys used it to stall investigation. Witnesses doubted their own memories. Even the mayor began to suspect this was all part of some elaborate hoax. He famously declared at a town hall, "Until I see these devils standing together in front of me, I will not believe there is more than one." 2 days later, a church bell rang out near Broughton Street. A group of Sunday worshippers saw 4 identical men step out of a chapel and walk in opposite directions, silent, calm, vanishing into the fog. From that day on, they were no longer Mr. Kellner. They were the 4, the breakdown of order. What made the Kellners so dangerous wasn't just their ability to deceive. It was how they used that deception to collapse faith in the system. Eyewitnesses became useless. Records were meaningless. Every alibi was both real and false. And worst of all, the public began to doubt the justice system itself. If the law couldn't even confirm who they were chasing, how could it ever deliver justice? The city fell into suspicion. People looked twice at their neighbors. Shopkeepers whispered that customers were watching them too closely. Children were told not to speak to strangers, not because they might be dangerous, but because they might not be who they claimed. The Kellners didn't just confuse Savannah. They divided it. Even Inspector Coyle, the man who had once believed truth was as solid as stone, began to unravel. His notes became erratic. His handwriting changed. He reportedly burned entire case files after claiming he saw one of the Kellners praying at his wife's grave. "I've arrested the same man 3 times, he wrote in one of his last entries. And yet every time, he swears he's someone new. The illusion was complete. By the time 2 of the Kellners were finally captured, the city was no longer asking whether they were guilty, but whether truth itself had any meaning left. And that was the Kellners' true crime. They didn't just kill a man. By early February 1874, after months of confusion and terror, Savannah's police finally captured 2 of the Kellner brothers. Their arrest came not through investigation, but by chance. A retired Union scout recognized the face of a man who'd already fled once, and local deputies intercepted him as he attempted to board a steamer bound for New Orleans. A second brother was found just days later, calmly walking into a watchmaker's shop, as if he had no reason to run. They didn't resist. In fact, they welcomed arrest. That's when things got worse. The 2 brothers, whose identities couldn't be confirmed, refused to answer to specific names. They answered questions with riddles. They mimicked each other perfectly. Each claimed to be innocent, while confessing to details only the killer could know. But nothing stuck. The courtroom becomes a stage. The case of the People versus Kellner et al. Was unlike anything the Savannah courts had seen. The presiding judge, Elias Broward, insisted the trial proceed with urgency. But every attempt to build a case hit the same wall. Who exactly was being tried? The prosecutor, George Cantrell, presented evidence of Walter Linney's murder. Fingerprints on the silk cord, witness accounts, inconsistent ledgers. But the defense, led by a nervous young attorney named Miles Eckert, flipped the strategy on its head. They didn't argue innocence. They argued uncertainty. Eckert told the jury, "If you cannot prove which Kellner brother is sitting before you, how can you claim guilt? To punish one for the crimes of another is not justice. It is vengeance disguised in law." And the jury listened. Witness after witness was brought forward, bankers, priests, guards, barmaids, all claiming they had seen Kellner that day. But when shown the men in the courtroom, none could say for certain which two they were. Every witness became a tool of confusion, even when one of the brothers stood up during proceedings and loudly declared, "I did it. I watched Lenny choke. I held the cord myself." The court froze. But the very next day, the same man sat silently, while his twin recited the confession word for word, tone, cadence, and all. It was like hearing an echo. One brother confessed. The other repeated it. The effect on the jury was devastating. The law's collapse. Judge Broward, desperate to maintain control, ordered both men held indefinitely. But without confirmed identities, formal charges became impossible. There was no way to assign one brother's actions to the other. Fingerprint analysis was in its infancy. Photography was too crude to capture nuance. And handwriting samples, as it turned out, matched both. The entire case was a trap, a legal hall of mirrors. Savannah's citizens grew restless. Some called for hanging both men, guilty or not. Others argued that releasing them would be a betrayal of justice. But neither side could answer the fundamental question. What if we hang the wrong one? In April 1874, the trial was suspended indefinitely. 2 months later, both brothers escaped from their jail cells, vanishing without a trace. No forced entry, no tunnels, no signs of struggle, just 2 empty beds and an unlocked door. The jailer, interviewed after the incident, wept as he said, "I saw them walk out. I thought they were someone else. I don't even know if I saw 1 or 2 or all 4. Legacy of the trial that never was. The Kellner case became a legal legend, taught in law schools, debated in barrooms, whispered about in court halls. To this day, it remains one of the only cases in American history where a murder suspect confessed and walked free not because of a technicality, but because the very structure of identity collapsed under pressure. The Savannah courthouse preserved the files under the title, "The Case of the Indistinguishables." No new evidence ever surfaced. No bodies were found. No definitive truth was ever proven. And the law, for all its might and formality, was powerless. The Kellners had played their final card, not in the shadows, but in front of a city desperate for order. And they had won. Let me know when you're ready to finish the series with Section 5, Disappearance, Death, and a Terrifying Legacy, where we uncover what happened after the brothers vanished and how their myth haunts Savannah to this day. You said, expand Section 5. ChatGPT said, here is the fully expanded Section 5 of the 4 Faces of Deceit, Savannah's twin killers of 1873, bringing the tale to a chilling conclusion. This chapter explores the mysterious aftermath of the Kellner brothers' escape, strange sightings, and the lingering psychological and cultural impact they left behind. When the Kellner brothers vanished from their jail cells in June of 1874, Savannah expected an explanation, an escape route, a bribe, a body, anything. But there was nothing. No footprints, no tools, no force locks. The guards insisted they had done their jobs. One even passed a lie detector test decades later, repeating only one phrase when asked what happened. "I thought I was looking at someone else." Just like that, the men who had tricked the city, embarrassed the courts, and confessed to a murder were gone. The sightings begin. Within a year of their disappearance, sightings of the Kellners began to trickle in from across the South. In Charleston, a man matching Caleb's description applied for a teaching job, only to vanish before starting. In Memphis, a pharmacist claimed 2 identical men tried to buy arsenic using 2 different names, minutes apart. In rural Louisiana, a preacher reported a stranger delivering a full sermon, quoting scripture word for word, and then disappearing before the final hymn. But none of these were confirmed. What made the reports even more disturbing was that they never overlapped. No one ever claimed to see all four together again. Instead, each Kellner seemed to re-emerge separately, slipping in and out of towns like ghosts wearing flesh. Even stranger were the diary entries, deathbed confessions, and anecdotes that emerged from civilians who had interacted with the man with the familiar face. People described feelings of unease, confusion, and an overwhelming sense that something wasn't quite right, that the man in front of them wasn't just a stranger, but someone pretending to be familiar. A hotel guest in Vicksburg wrote, "He looked like my father, my brother, my husband, but I knew he was none of them. He smiled like he had worn all their faces before." The myth grows. By the late 1800s, the Kellners were no longer just fugitives. They had become folklore. In Savannah, parents told stories of the four brothers to scare misbehaving children. Tell the truth, or the Kellner who steals names will come for yours. Books were written, plays performed, even a silent film in 1913 titled The Four, who were one, now lost to time. But even as the public myth grew, so did the disturbing undercurrent of unresolved truth. In 1922, a tattered leather-bound journal was found behind the wall of an abandoned house in Chatham County. Inside were dozens of passages written in nearly identical handwriting, detailing observations of people, habits, money flows, and dreams. One section simply read, "We are no longer pretending to be one man. We are becoming something else, something that cannot be named." Some believe it was Luther Kellner's final record. Others say it was a hoax. But the final page was more unsettling than any confession. People think we disappeared. They are wrong. We simply stopped needing to be seen. A legacy that won't die. To this day, no graves for the Kellner brothers have ever been found. No confirmed death certificates. No photographs, despite the rise of photography in their era. Nothing solid, only stories. But Savannah hasn't forgotten them. Several downtown buildings still report strange phenomena. Patrons swear they've been served by the same waiter who disappeared moments earlier. Shopkeepers recall customers whose faces seem eerily familiar, though they've never met. Even modern surveillance systems occasionally capture blurry figures that resemble each other a little too closely. Paranormal investigators have been drawn to the old jail where the Kellners escaped. EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recordings have picked up whispers of the name Linny, along with laughter, not a single laugh, but four voices overlapping in unison. The city's archives contain a chilling document, a 1938 police report filed by an officer who claimed to be tailed by four identical men in black coats, standing at each corner of a city square, watching him from all directions. When asked what they did, he answered, "They waited." Like they had all the time in the world. What makes the Kellner story truly terrifying isn't just their escape, or their manipulation, or even the murder itself. It's what they represent. They shattered the illusion that identity is fixed, that justice always wins, that people are who they say they are. They proved that with enough coordination, enough discipline, and enough madness, truth can be bent until it breaks, not with weapons, but with faces. To this day, no one knows where they went. Some believe they died in obscurity. Others believe they never existed at all. But if you ever find yourself in Savannah, walking alone at dusk, and a stranger approaches, smiling, maybe a little too familiar, don't ask his name, because he might not be alone, and he might already know yours.